The world has witnessed many revolutions rise from struggle, but few are as bold as the awakening now echoing between Africa and the Caribbean. In this powerful message, Ibrahim Traoré, the leader of Burkina Faso, speaks directly to Jamaican Prime Minister Andrew Holness with both urgency and brotherhood. His words are not meant to divide. They are meant to awaken. Africa and the Caribbean, he says, are two pieces of the same broken soul. While Africa bleeds under open exploitation, the Caribbean bleeds silently through diplomacy and debt. Both are victims of the same historical machine that rewards obedience and punishes independence. Traoré's message is more than politics. It is a moral confrontation. He declares that the world does not fear all black leaders. It only fears those who refuse to kneel. The polished diplomacy of the global stage, he argues, has become a modern chain. Caution may win applause, but it never wins freedom. Caution builds careers, Traoré says. Courage builds nations. His challenge to Prime Minister Holness is also a challenge to every leader of African descent. The West will always celebrate stability because stability protects its interests. But true freedom, Traoré insists, is never given through polite negotiations inside halls funded by the same powers that once enslaved entire continents. Freedom must be built with conviction, sacrifice, and unity. He recalls the story of Haiti, the first black republic, punished for 200 years simply because it dared to be free. The message is clear. As long as Africa and the Caribbean remain divided, they will continue living the same history under different names. The flags may have changed, but the control has not. This is not a call to hostility. It is a call to awakening. The time for cautious words has ended. The time for unity, courage, and self-determination has arrived. Ibrahim Traoré's voice becomes the question that history now asks of all nations. Will you choose safety, or will you choose sovereignty? To understand the fire behind Ibrahim Traoré's message, we must look beyond his words and into the world that shaped them. His address to Prime Minister Andrew Holness is not simply a criticism. It is a mirror reflecting the shared history of Africa and the Caribbean, two regions once chained by the same empire and now restrained by the same economic and diplomatic systems that replaced those chains with contracts. For centuries, Africa was seen as a supplier of resources and labor, while the Caribbean became a test ground for control. Both regions won their flags, but not their freedom. They achieved independence in ceremony, but remained bound by dependence in reality. This is the illusion Traoré seeks to destroy. He sees the polite diplomacy that defines post-colonial politics as the final stage of colonialism itself. In his eyes, the new empire does not arrive in ships, but in suits. It does not command through generals, but through loans, aid, and the promise of stability. In Burkina Faso, Traoré has chosen a different path. His decision to expel French troops, to reject the CFA franc, and to refuse Western military supervision was not a gesture of rebellion. It was a declaration that sovereignty is not a gift to be granted. It is a responsibility to be taken. The move was risky. It triggered sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and an intense campaign to paint him as a radical. Yet among the people of Burkina Faso, it awakened something long forgotten: pride. Across the ocean, in the Caribbean, Traoré sees a different kind of struggle. Nations like Jamaica and Barbados stand tall in global forums, Yet their economies remain dependent on the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Development programs often come with hidden conditions. Loans arrive, tied to policy demands. The result is a form of soft control disguised as partnership. When Traore asks, "What has caution ever given our people?" he is exposing the quiet suffering behind these relationships. His comparison is direct, but not disrespectful. He recognizes Holness as a man of intellect and diplomacy, but he warns that diplomacy, when practiced under dependency, becomes submission. He argues that Western powers do not fear African or Caribbean governments that cooperate. They fear those who act without permission. They fear a nation that creates its own path instead of following their script. They fear a leader who chooses conviction over comfort. The core of Traoré's philosophy lies in a single conviction: unity. He believes that the separation of the Black world is not accidental. It is strategic. They deal with Africa alone, the Caribbean alone, Haiti alone, he says, so that we never realize we are one civilization. For him, the fragmentation of Black identity is the greatest victory of colonialism, and its undoing will be the greatest revolution of modern history. To make his case, he points to Haiti, a nation that dared to do what others only debated. The Haitian Revolution did not ask for freedom. It seized it. But the price was isolation, punishment, and debt so crushing that it became a warning to all who might follow. For 2 centuries, Haiti has carried both the pride of liberation and the pain of abandonment. Traoré uses Haiti as a symbol of both courage and consequence. His question is not just rhetorical. It is prophetic. If Haiti was punished for independence, will modern nations choose submission to avoid the same fate? This is where his challenge becomes global. It is no longer about Africa or the Caribbean. It is about a civilization reclaiming its voice. He envisions a world where African nations, Caribbean islands, and Black communities across the diaspora form a single alliance of purpose, not under flags, but under shared destiny. He calls it not an African revolution, but a Black renaissance. For Traoré, the road ahead will not be easy. It will demand sacrifices, and it will test loyalties. Yet he insists that the alternative is far worse. To remain polite in the face of injustice is to participate in it. To remain stable under control is to choose slavery with comfort. His message to Holness and to the world is both simple and eternal. Freedom without courage is illusion. Unity without risk is decoration. And a people who wait for permission will never be free. At the heart of Ibrahim Traoré's message lies a defining crossroads, a moment where words are no longer enough. His challenge to Andrew Holness is not simply political. It is spiritual. It is about what kind of leader a man chooses to become when faced with the truth that safety has never saved a nation. Traoré understands what many refuse to accept, that the greatest threat to freedom is not open war, but silent obedience. He does not condemn diplomacy itself. He condemns the kind of diplomacy that teaches leaders to fear discomfort more than dishonor. He asks a question that echoes across generations. When has a Black nation ever been allowed to negotiate its freedom? He reminds Holness and every leader who listens that true liberation has never come through polite discussion with the very powers that profit from dependency. In Burkina Faso, Traoré's own decisions prove his philosophy. When he expelled foreign troops and reclaimed control over national security, he did not seek permission. He acted. When he cut ties with foreign-controlled currencies, he did not wait for approval. He took the risk. These choices did not make him popular among global powers, but they made him credible among his people. He became a symbol of courage in a world where too many leaders confuse diplomacy with dignity. Across the ocean, the Caribbean remains at a different point in the struggle. Nations like Jamaica have achieved stability, but not full sovereignty. They maintain alliances with the West in the name of progress, yet progress remains slow and uneven. Traore sees this not as failure, but as a warning. He fears that the Caribbean, in its effort to stay balanced, may lose its boldness. He reminds Holness that no one is feared for compliance. The world fears only those who refuse to play by its rules. His words carry weight because they are backed by sacrifice. He speaks not from theory, but from experience. Burkina Faso has endured sanctions, propaganda, and isolation, yet its people remain steadfast. Traore often says that it is better to die standing than to live kneeling. To him, this is not rhetoric. It is survival. In a global system built to discipline defiant nations, courage becomes both weapon and shield. The turning point of his message comes when he expands the vision beyond two men and two nations. He redefines the idea of a global black identity. Africa, he says, is the heart. The Caribbean is the memory. Black America is the voice. Brazil is the blood. Each region carries part of the same body. When one is poisoned, the entire body weakens. When one rises, all rise. This vision of unity is what the West fears most. They understand that a united black world would become a geopolitical power unlike any other. It would command natural resources, cultural influence, and demographic strength. It would rewrite the rules of the global order. This is why, Traore insists, the West works to keep Africa, the Caribbean, and the diaspora divided. They invite leaders to summits not to empower them, but to control them. They offer loans not to help, but to bind. They allow influence, but not independence. Traore's tone in this moment is not angry, but resolute. He does not seek war. He seeks awakening. He calls on Holness to understand that neutrality in the face of oppression is not peace, it is participation. Silence, he says, is the most dangerous form of surrender. The black world cannot afford to stay silent while its freedom is negotiated by others. He challenges Holness directly, but respectfully. I do not need you to follow me, he says. I need you to join me, not in comfort, but in consequence. It is a call to action, not for imitation, but for alignment. Africa has chosen to stand. The Caribbean must now decide whether it will stand beside Africa or watch from a safe distance. In this turning point, Traore transforms a political speech into a moral reckoning. He reminds the world that the greatest revolutions begin not with armies, but with decisions. History, he says, does not remember diplomats. It remembers those who dared to act when others were afraid. Courage, not caution, has always built nations. And now, as Africa begins to rebuild its sovereignty, it calls upon its brothers and sisters across the sea to do the same. The age of caution is ending. The age of courage has begun. As Ibrahim Traoré's message deepens, his tone shifts from confrontation to revelation. He begins to expose the invisible weapons that have replaced armies and guns. In his view, colonization has not ended. It has evolved. The battlefield is no longer land or labor. It is finance, narrative, and the human mind. He warns that the most dangerous chains are not made of iron, but of credit and debt. The IMF is not a bank, he says. It is a battlefield. That to him, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank are modern armies dressed as institutions. They no longer invade nations with soldiers. They do it with spreadsheets. They lend money, then dictate policies. They promise progress, then control national budgets. They tell leaders what to privatize, what to import, what to abandon. Traore sees this system as a new kind of empire, one that rules through numbers instead of flags. When he speaks of Jamaica's debt, or of African nations still borrowing from those who once enslaved them, he is not just criticizing economics. He is naming the continuation of colonial power in another form. They do not need chains, he says. They have interest rates. They do not need whips. They have credit scores. In his vision, the West's greatest fear is not black poverty. It is black prosperity without permission. The world tolerates Africa and the Caribbean as long as they remain dependent. The moment they become self-sufficient, they are labeled as threats. This is why, Traore argues, every attempt at independence is met with sanctions, propaganda, and division. He speaks of aid as a rope and of loans as a noose. He believes that what is called assistance is often a trap that keeps nations from standing on their own. The same nations that once sent soldiers now send economists. The same powers that once controlled land now control liquidity. They have learned that domination through numbers is more efficient than domination through war. But Traore's insight goes further than money. He points to the power of media and culture as the new front lines of control. They took our land, he says. Now they script our lives. But he argues that the modern world has mastered a form of mental colonization, shaping how people think, what they value, and whom they admire. In global media, Africa is still portrayed as helpless and poor, while the Caribbean is painted as unstable or dependent. Western networks never show African engineers building cities or Caribbean scientists developing solutions. They show chaos, not creativity. They show hunger, not innovation. This constant repetition, Traore warns, becomes a form of psychological warfare. They no longer need armies, he says. They only need our admiration. He explains that when a people lose control of their story, they lose control of their future. When their heroes are chosen by outsiders, their destiny is rewritten by foreign hands. The West celebrates certain icons, he says, not because of their courage, but because of their compliance. They turned Garvey into a ghost, and Marley into a brand. They celebrate rhythm, but silence rebellion. For Traore, the answer lies in cultural ownership. The black world must reclaim its narrative, rebuild its platforms, and restore its dignity through creation. He calls for black-owned broadcasting networks, African-led film studios, and Pan-African streaming services that tell real stories of liberation, not the ones edited to fit Western comfort. Revolution does not begin with guns, he says. It begins with narrative. He extends this message beyond men and politics. He reminds the world that the first revolutionaries were women, the mothers who carried messages in their songs, who protected children when soldiers came, who taught resistance in whispers. The black woman, Traore declares, is not our support. She is our strategy. That he insists that no revolution can survive without her leadership in government, education, and culture. In his closing moments, Traore connects all these struggles into one reality. Debt, media, and culture are not separate arenas. They are the same war fought on different fronts. The true enemy, he says, is dependency, whether financial, intellectual, or emotional. He ends with a warning and a promise. Nations that choose safety will inherit silence. Those that choose sovereignty will inherit struggle, but also respect. The West no longer conquers by force, he says. It conquers by permission. It wins when we stay polite. His final words cut through the noise like prophecy. We will no longer beg history to remember us. We will force it to. When the speech quiets and the echo fades, the meaning of Ibrahim Traoré's message becomes clear. It is not simply a challenge to Andrew Holness. It is a mirror for every leader and every citizen who still believes freedom can be negotiated. His words reach beyond Burkina Faso and Jamaica. They speak to Lagos, to Kingston, to Port-au-Prince, to every place where the descendants of stolen people still fight to reclaim their dignity. Traoré reminds his audience that true power begins when a people stop asking for permission. The struggle for sovereignty is not fought in conferences or committees. It is fought in the minds of those who refuse to accept inferiority as destiny. He calls upon the global black world to rise from silence and transform its unity from a dream into a plan. He warns that safety has become the new form of surrender. Stability without control is just captivity with comfort. Nations that build their progress on Western approval are like ships anchored to foreign shores. They may appear steady, but they are never free to sail. The future will not belong to safe leaders, he says, but to those who play for victory. For him, courage is not a slogan. It is a discipline. It means facing the world's strongest powers without apology. It means rejecting loans that buy loyalty and media that distort truth. It means understanding that poverty is not the absence of wealth, but the absence of ownership. The ultimate revolution, he says, begins when people own what they create, tell their own stories, and govern without interference. He also reminds the world that liberation is not a man's mission alone. It is a collective journey built by families, teachers, farmers, and artists. It is carried by women who have always guarded the soul of nations. Black women, he declares, are not our background. They are our blueprint. Traoré ends his reflection not in anger, but in resolve. He calls for a world where Africa and the Caribbean no longer echo their pain separately, but build their power together. We are one people scattered by force, he says. We will become one power united by choice. History does not wait for the cautious. It rewards the bold. As Ibrahim Traoré's final words echo across the continents, his message turns from dialogue to destiny. The world has heard many speeches about unity, but few have demanded it with such clarity. His call is not about rebellion for rebellion's sake. It is about the right of every nation, every leader, and every child to live without permission from powers that profit from their silence. He warns that the next war will not be fought with guns, but with contracts, currency, and information. Nations will not be conquered by soldiers, but by systems that control their debt, their data, and their dreams. If Africa and the Caribbean do not build their own defenses in these arenas, they will once again become spectators in a world shaped by others. The enemy no longer wears uniforms. It wears respectability. It speaks the language of aid while tightening the leash of dependence. Traore's warning is also a prophecy. He sees a future divided between those who serve comfort and those who serve conviction. The first will be celebrated. The second will be punished. Yet only the second will be remembered. A leader must be willing to lose favor abroad to gain freedom at home, he says. The price of sovereignty is high, but the cost of submission is endless. He urges the black world to understand that freedom is not inherited. It must be engineered. It must be designed by the minds of the young, built by the hands of the brave, and protected by the unity of the global South. He calls for a new generation that replaces speeches with systems and protests with production. This is the meaning of a black renaissance. In his final breath, Traore's voice rises beyond borders. If they silence me, speak louder. If they remove me, replace me. If they bury me, continue me. His words become a vow for an entire civilization, to build, to lead, and to rise. The time for caution has ended. The age of courage has begun. Now it is your turn. Share this message, speak it, live it, because history will not remember the polite, it will remember the powerful.